The human mind craves order. We need sequences that make sense, patterns we can predict, numbers that progress the way they're supposed to. When those fundamental expectations shatter, when the world stops following its own rules, something primal awakens inside us, something that whispers we've crossed into a place where the normal laws of reality no longer apply. Tonight, I want to tell you about a phenomenon that's been reported across 7 different states, always on remote highways, always at night, and always with the same impossible detail, mile markers that count backward. It started in 2019, though there are whispers it had been happening long before anyone thought to report it. A truck driver named Marcus Chen was hauling freight across Nevada on Interstate 80, a route he'd driven hundreds of times over 15 years. It was 2:47 a.m. when he noticed something off. Marcus wasn't the type to spook easily. He'd driven through every kind of weather, every hour of the night, through stretches of highway so empty they felt like driving on the surface of the moon. But that night, something made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He'd just passed mile marker 214 when he glanced at his GPS. According to the satellite, he was making good time, maintaining his speed, moving forward just as he should be. But when the next marker appeared in his headlights, it read 213, then 212, then 211. Marcus told investigators later, "What I'm about to tell you happened to me 3 weeks ago, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. Every time I close my eyes, I see those numbers counting down, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to drive at night again without watching the mile markers, with a terror that sits like ice in my stomach. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the details matter, and if this ever happens to you, you need to know what you're dealing with." It was a Tuesday night, nothing special about it, nothing that would make you think the universe was about to tilt sideways and show you something it shouldn't. I was driving from Phoenix to Albuquerque, a route I'd taken maybe a dozen times before for work. I'm a medical equipment sales rep, which means I spend more time on highways than I do in my own bed, and I've learned to love the solitude of those long night drives when the world feels empty and you can think without interruption. The highway stretched out before me like a black ribbon under a sky so full of stars it almost hurt to look at them. My radio was playing some late-night talk show, the host's voice a comfortable drone that kept me company without demanding attention. I had my cruise control set at exactly the speed limit, my coffee still warm in the cup holder, and absolutely no reason to believe that anything unusual was about to happen. Mile marker 247 passed on my right, reflecting my headlights for just a moment before disappearing into the darkness behind me. I remember noticing it because I'd been counting markers to gauge my progress, doing the mental math to figure out when I'd need to stop for gas. 30 seconds later, maybe less, the next marker appeared in my headlights. Mile marker 246, normal, expected, the way reality is supposed to work. But then came the next one, and that's when my comfortable world started to crack. Mile marker 245 should have been next, right? That's how numbers work. That's how mile markers have worked since the interstate highway system was built. That's how the universe is supposed to maintain its basic consistency. But when my headlights illuminated the next marker, it read 244. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, like when you miss a step going downstairs and your body floods with adrenaline before you even realize what's happened. I told myself I'd miscounted, that I'd been distracted by the radio or lost in thought and simply missed a marker. Easy explanation, rational, the kind of thing that happens when you've been driving too long. Except I knew I hadn't miscounted. I'd been watching specifically, paying attention deliberately, counting off each marker as part of my mental calculation. But the mind is funny when confronted with impossible things. It reaches for any explanation, no matter how unlikely, rather than accept that reality might not be following the rules. So I kept driving, kept watching. And when the next marker appeared, I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Mile marker 243, then 242, then 241. The numbers were counting down, running backward, defying every law of physics and logic that I'd built my understanding of the world upon. My speedometer still showed 68 miles per hour. The white line still streaked past in the right direction. The stars overhead maintained their proper positions. Everything except those markers insisted I was moving forward through space like I was supposed to. I checked my GPS, desperate for some electronic confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind, and it showed my blue dot progressing east along Interstate 40, eating up miles in the correct direction. making good time toward my destination, but the markers kept counting down: 242, 139, 238, and with each one, my pulse quickened and my breathing got shallower, and that rational part of my brain that likes to explain things away started to run out of explanations. I turned off the radio because suddenly that comfortable drone wasn't comfortable anymore. It was just noise interfering with my ability to think, to process what was happening. The silence that led the car was thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of my tires on asphalt and the sound of my own breathing, which seemed too loud, too fast, too panicked for a situation that I couldn't even properly define as dangerous. At mile marker 235, I realized I hadn't seen another car in over 20 minutes. The highway had been quiet when this started, sure, but there had been the occasional pair of taillights in the distance, the rare set of headlights passing in the opposite direction. Now there was nothing. Just me and the road and those backward counting markers in a darkness that seemed deeper than it should be, thicker, like I was driving through ink instead of air. I thought about pulling over, stopping the car, taking a moment to collect myself and figure out what was happening, but something stopped me, some instinct I couldn't quite name, a feeling that stopping would be worse than continuing, that the shoulder of this particular stretch of highway was not a place I wanted to be when I wasn't moving. Mile marker 230 passed, then 229, and I started doing math in my head, trying to calculate how many markers I'd seen, counting down how far I'd traveled in this impossible backward state. 17 markers so far, which should mean 17 miles, except my GPS insisted I'd only covered 4 miles since this started. Time and distance weren't matching up. Reality was coming unglued, it seems, and I was trapped inside a car moving through it with no way to stop what was happening and no understanding of what it even meant. The landscape outside my window started to look wrong, though I couldn't immediately pinpoint why. The darkness seemed to move in ways darkness shouldn't move, flowing and shifting like something alive. The stars overhead were too bright now, harsh and cold, and when I glanced at them I felt dizzy, like I was falling upward into that vast black sky. I forced my eyes back to the road, back to the white lines and the yellow divider and the pavement stretching endlessly forward, and I tried to focus on the ordinary reality of driving while my peripheral vision kept insisting that nothing about this was ordinary anymore. Mile marker 220 appeared, and I felt something shift. The air inside the car got colder, not gradually but suddenly, like I'd driven into a freezer. My breath started coming out in visible puffs, and I cranked the heater up to maximum, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't coming from outside, I realized. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, a bone-deep chill that my car's heater couldn't touch. I checked the outside temperature display on my dashboard, and it read 71 degrees, exactly what it had been reading for the past hour. But I was shivering, my teeth chattering, frost forming on the inside of my windshield in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing in some language I couldn't read. At mile marker 215, I saw the first one. I almost missed it because I was so focused on the markers themselves, on watching those numbers count down and trying to make sense of the impossible. But movement caught my eye, something off to the right, standing maybe 50 feet from the highway's edge. It looked like a person, just standing there in the darkness, perfectly still, facing the road, facing me. I couldn't make out any details, couldn't see a face or clothing or anything that would help me identify what I was looking at. Just a dark figure, human-shaped, motionless in a way that nothing living should be motionless. Watching my car as I drove past, I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by something, my eyes playing tricks after too long staring at the road. But then I saw another one, this time on the left, same distance from the highway, same perfect stillness, same sense of focused attention directed at me. And then another and another, until I realized there was one standing beside every mile marker I passed. These silent watchers in the darkness, bearing witness to my backward journey through whatever this place was becoming. Mile marker 210 came and went, and the watchers were closer now, maybe 30 feet from the road, and there were more of them, not just one per marker, but 2 or 3, and they were all facing my direction, all tracking my progress with an attention that felt hungry, expectant, like they were waiting for something to happen. My hands were shaking on the wheel so badly I could barely maintain my lane, and I was driving too fast now, pushing 80 miles per hour, desperate to get through whatever this was, to reach some end point where the markers would start counting forward again, and the world would snap back into its proper configuration. But the faster I drove, the slower I seemed to go. The mile markers were taking longer to appear in my headlights, as if distance itself was stretching, expanding, becoming elastic. Mile marker 209 felt like it took 5 minutes to reach, even though my speedometer insisted I was maintaining 80 miles per hour. Mile marker 208 took even longer, and I realized with a horror that clenched my stomach like a fist that at this rate, I might never reach zero. I might be trapped in this countdown forever, driving faster and faster while making less and less progress. The numbers decreasing infinitely slowly, asymptotically approaching an endpoint I could never actually reach. The watchers were right up against the highway now, so close I could see them in detail as I passed, and I wished desperately that I couldn't. They weren't people. They looked like people from a distance, had the right general shape and size, but up close you could see that something was wrong. With their proportions, with the way they stood, with the way they didn't move or breathe or blink, their faces were pale and smooth, too smooth, like mannequins or dolls, but their eyes were dark pits that seemed to follow my car with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman. And they were reaching toward the road now, extending arms that were too long, fingers that had too many joints, as if they were trying to grab my car as it passed, trying to pull me off the highway and into whatever darkness they inhabited. Mile marker 205 finally appeared, and I was crying now, not sobbing, but just tears streaming down my face, my body's automatic response to a terror my conscious mind couldn't fully process. I wanted to call someone, to hear another human voice, to have some confirmation that I still existed in the normal world. But when I glanced at my phone sitting in the cup holder, its screen was black, and no matter how many times I pressed the power button, it wouldn't turn on. The battery had been at 76% when this started. Now it was completely dead, and I was truly alone with this nightmare, cut off from help, from communication, from anything except the counting down markers and the watchers and my own mounting panic. At mile marker 200, the road started to change. Cracks appeared in the asphalt, thin at first but rapidly widening, spreading across the highway like a network of black veins. The white lines began to fade, their paint peeling away in strips that curled up like dead skin. The pavement itself seemed to be decaying, aging decades in seconds, breaking down into gravel and dirt, and finally just packed earth, as if I was driving backward through the highway's own history, watching it unmake itself mile by backward mile. But my car kept rolling smoothly, my tires finding purchase on surfaces that shouldn't have been drivable, physics bending itself to Lo my continued progress through this deteriorating landscape. The watchers were changing too, becoming less human. With each marker I passed, their bodies elongating and twisting, their faces losing what little definition they'd had, becoming just smooth expanses of pale flesh with those terrible dark eyes. They weren't reaching toward the road anymore. They were leaning away from it now, as if recoiling from something, as if whatever was ahead of me was so awful that even these nightmare creatures wanted no part of it. That realization sent a spike of pure terror through my chest. If these things were afraid of what was coming, what chance did I have? Mile marker 195 passed, and the darkness beyond my headlights became absolute. Before, I could at least make out vague shapes in the gloom, the suggestion of landscape, the horizon where earth met sky. Now there was nothing except the small bubble of illumination from my headlights, beyond which existed only black void. It felt like I was driving through space, through the gap between stars, through somewhere that had never been meant for human eyes or human presence. The road beneath my tires was barely recognizable now, just two ruts in raw earth, the kind of primitive track that might have been here before the first white settlers arrived, before Native Americans walked this land, before humans existed at all. At mile marker 190, I heard the sound for the first time. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A low vibration that I felt in my bones before I heard it with my ears, a frequency so deep it was almost subsonic. It sounded like breathing, massive and slow, as if something enormous was inhaling and exhaling in rhythm with my backward journey. Each breath seemed to coincide with a mile marker, each exhale a count lower on the countdown, and I realized with dawning horror that the road itself was breathing, that I was traveling through the body of something vast and ancient and utterly alien to human comprehension. The temperature kept dropping and frost was covering everything now, coating my dashboard, my steering wheel, the inside of the windshield so thickly I had to keep wiping it away with my hand just to see the road ahead. My wipers had stopped working at some point, frozen solid, useless. My heater was blasting hot air that turned to visible steam in the frigid atmosphere, but did nothing to warm me or slow the advancing ice. I could see my breath, thick white clouds that hung in the air like smoke, and when I touched my face, my skin was numb, my fingers stiff with cold that went beyond mere temperature into something more fundamental, more absolute. Mile marker 185, and the watchers were gone. Whatever had been standing beside the road, tracking my progress, had vanished or fled, or perhaps never existed at all. Their absence was somehow worse than their presence had been, because now I was truly alone in this place, with nothing between me and whatever waited at the end of the countdown. The void pressed in on all sides, thick and suffocating, and my headlights seemed to be dimming, pushed back by the darkness, their reach shortening with every passing mile until I could barely see 20 feet ahead. At mile marker 180, my engine started to sputter. The smooth purr I'd relied on for hours began to hitch and catch, missing beats, losing power. My speedometer dropped from 80 to 70 to 60, and no matter how hard I pressed the accelerator, it kept falling. I pumped the gas pedal desperately, terrified of what would happen if I came to a complete stop in this place, but the engine kept losing power, kept dying by degrees. My headlights flickered, dimmed further, and I could hear something scraping beneath the car, metal on earth, as if the road surface was rising up to meet my undercarriage, trying to drag me to a halt. Mile marker 175 appeared, barely visible in my failing headlights, and my car finally gave up. The engine died with a cough and shudder, and my momentum carried me perhaps another 100 feet before I rolled to a stop on what I could only barely identify as a road anymore. The headlights went out, the dashboard lights went dark. Every electrical system in my car shut down simultaneously, leaving me sitting in absolute darkness and absolute silence, surrounded by a void so complete it felt like being buried alive, like being sealed in a tomb at the bottom of the ocean, like being nowhere at all. I sat there in that darkness, not breathing, not moving, not even thinking, just existing in a state of pure animal terror, while seconds stretched into minutes, and I waited for whatever was going to happen next. The breathing sound was louder now, so loud I could feel it vibrating through the car, through my seat, through my bones. It was coming from beneath me, I realized. The road itself was breathing, inhaling and exhaling with a rhythm that was slowly increasing, getting faster, like something waking up, becoming more alert, more aware of my presence. Then the lights appeared. Not headlights, not taillights, not any kind of illumination I could immediately identify or categorize. They were distant at first, maybe a mile ahead on the road, small points of cold blue luminescence that bobbed and weaved like distant candles, like will-o'-the-wisps leading travelers into swamps. As I watched, they began to move toward me, dozens of them, hundreds, floating along the road's surface, leaving trails of blue fire in the air that faded slowly, creating patterns that hurt to look at, geometry that seemed to fold back on itself in ways that violated three-dimensional space. The lights got closer, and I could see now that they weren't SEPA. Great entities, but parts of something larger, nodes in a vast network, connection points in a structure too big and too complex for my mind to fully grasp. They flowed around my car like water, like electricity, pulsing with that same deep rhythm as the breathing. And where they touched my vehicle, I heard sizzling sounds, saw frost forming, and then sublimating instantly, saw the paint on my hood beginning to peel and flake away, as if the lights were dissolving it at a molecular level. A light passed through my window, through the glass itself without breaking it, and I felt it pass through me, through my skin, my muscle, my bones. A sensation like being x-rayed by something that could see deeper than flesh, that could perceive thoughts and memories in the electrical signals that made me conscious and alive. It paused inside my chest, hovering near my frantically beating heart, and I had the overwhelming sense that it was studying me, analyzing me, trying to understand what kind of creature had driven so far down the backward road, what kind of fool had ignored all the warnings and kept going when they should have stopped. The light moved on, exited my body as easily as it had entered, and rejoined the flowing stream of its companions, and I gasped and choked and realized I'd stopped breathing entirely while it was inside me. My heart was racing, my lungs burning, and when I tried to restart my car, the key just clicked uselessly. Battery dead, starter dead, everything dead except me and whatever alien intelligence was investigating my presence in this impossible place. The lights flowed away finally, following the road forward or backward or whatever direction had meaning here, leaving me in darkness again, but not the complete darkness from before. Now there was a faint glow coming from ahead, from where the lights had originated, a pale illumination that let me see. The road stretching forward into something that looked like distance, but felt like depth, like I was looking down into a well that had no bottom, a shaft that drilled through reality itself into whatever lay beneath. I knew I had to get out of the car. Every instinct screamed against it, insisted that leaving the car meant certain death, but staying put felt worse somehow. I was a sitting target, a stationary object in a place where everything else was moving, flowing, breathing. So I grabbed my useless phone out of the cup holder, pulled my jacket tight around my shoulders, and opened my door into air so cold it burned my lungs like inhaling fire. The sound of the door opening was unnaturally loud in the silence, a sharp click and creak that echoed in ways sound shouldn't echo, bouncing back from surfaces I couldn't see, from walls or boundaries or edges to this place that existed somewhere beyond the visible. I put one foot on the ground, felt it sink slightly into earth that was soft and yielding despite the cold, and smelled something sharp and acrid, like ozone after lightning, like chemicals burning, like the air after someone's been welding metal. I stood up, leaving my car behind, and started walking forward along the road, following the faint glow in the distance because going back felt impossible, because the markers had been counting down, and that meant something was ahead, some destination or terminus or endpoint that I needed to reach. My feet crunched on gravel that appeared and disappeared beneath my steps, on pavement that flickered in and out of existence, on bare earth that felt ancient and unused and somehow aware of my presence. Mile marker 170 emerged from the gloom ahead, and I walked past it, kept moving forward, kept counting down even though I was on foot now, even though my car was dead and abandoned somewhere behind me. The glow ahead grew brighter, took on definition, and I began to make out a structure in the distance, something massive and dark that rose from the road's surface like a monument, like a building, like a gate. The breathing sound was coming from there. I realized whatever was producing that rhythmic inhale and exhale was inside that structure, or maybe the structure itself was breathing, its walls expanding and contracting with each cycle. Mile marker 165 passed, then 160, and the structure became clearer with each step. It was enormous, at least 15 stories tall, made of something that looked like stone but moved like flesh, walls that undulated slowly, rhythmically, surface textures that shifted and changed as I watched. There were no windows, no doors, no visible entrance or exit, just smooth walls that breathed and walls that pulsed with veins or cables or something that carried light or fluid or energy from one part of the structure to another. At mile marker 155, I saw the sign. It was old, weathered, the kind of green reflective sign you see on highways everywhere, but the words on it were wrong, were impossible, were in a language I shouldn't have been able to read but somehow understood anyway. End of forward road, it said, beginning of return. And beneath that, in smaller letters that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, those who reach zero cannot leave. I stopped walking. That sign felt like a warning, like a final chance to turn back, to retrace my steps to my car, to somehow find a way to reverse this journey before it reached its inevitable conclusion. But even as I thought about turning around, I knew it was too late. The road behind me was gone, consumed by darkness, by void, by absence. There was only forward now, only the countdown, only the massive breathing structure ahead and whatever waited inside it. At mile marker 0, mile marker 150 appeared. And I forced my legs to keep moving, to carry me forward despite the terror that wanted to root me in place, to freeze me like the watchers had been frozen, to turn me into another motionless observer of the backward road. The structure loomed larger with each step, its walls reaching up toward a sky I could no longer see, its breathing growing louder, more insistent, matching my heartbeat now, syncing with my pulse until I couldn't tell if I was hearing the structure breathe or hearing my own body, couldn't distinguish where I ended and this place began. At mile marker 145, the structure's surface began to change. Patterns emerged in those pulsing walls, images or symbols or something between the two, depicting scenes I couldn't fully comprehend, but that filled me with a deep existential dread. I saw highways stretching across continents, across planets, across gulfs of space that shouldn't have contained roads at all. I saw travelers like me, countless millions of them, driving their backward miles, counting down toward destinations they didn't understand. I saw the structure itself, or structures like it, standing at the end of every countdown, breathing and waiting and serving some purpose I couldn't grasp. Mile marker 140. and I was close enough now to feel the heat coming off those walls, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the bitter cold of the air, creating convection currents that swirled around me, pulling at my clothes, tugging me toward the structure like an invitation or a command. The breathing was so loud now it drowned out all other sound, including my own footsteps, including my ragged breathing, including the frantic hammering of my heart that felt like it might burst through my ribs with each beat. At mile marker 135, I saw the others. They were embedded in the structure's walls, hundreds of them, thousands, pressed into that living stone flesh. Like insects in amber, their bodies preserved in mid-motion, their faces locked in expressions of terror or wonder or something beyond human emotion entirely. Some looked fresh, recently trapped, still wearing modern clothes, still clutching cell phones and car keys. Others were ancient, their clothing rotted away, their bodies mummified, their eyes sunken but somehow still aware, still conscious, still experiencing whatever existence meant for those who'd reached zero and been claimed by this place. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to do anything except keep walking toward that nightmare structure, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs kept moving forward mechanically as if walking had become an automatic process that my conscious mind no longer controlled. Mile marker 130 passed, then 125, and I was so close to the structure now I could see individual details in those imprisoned bodies, could see their fingers twitching slightly, could see their chests rising and falling with breaths so slow they might take minutes or hours or days to complete. At mile marker 120, the structure opened. Not a door, not a portal, but an opening that formed in the living wall, flesh and stone peeling back like lips, revealing an interior that was somehow darker than the void I'd driven through. A darkness so absolute it seemed to pull light into itself, to devour illumination the way a black hole devours matter. The breathing sound reached a crescendo, a massive inhalation that created wind rushing past me toward that opening, trying to pull me in, trying to drag me forward into whatever existed beyond the threshold. I grabbed mile marker 115 as I passed it, wrapped my arms around the post, held on with every ounce of strength I possessed while the wind screamed past me and the structure breathed and the countdown continued in my mind even though I was no longer walking forward. But the marker wasn't stable, it was sinking into the ground, pulled down by the same force that was trying to pull me into the structure. And I felt my hands slipping on the cold metal, felt my grip failing despite my desperate effort to hold on. The marker went under, disappeared into earth that swallowed it like quicksand, and I stumbled forward, caught myself, kept moving because stopping meant being consumed by that reaching darkness, by that pulling force, by whatever machinery or biology or impossible physics powered this place and demanded travelers as fuel or tribute or sustenance. Mile marker 110 was next, barely visible through the wind and darkness, and I lunged for it, caught it, held it for precious seconds before it too began to sink, began to drag me down toward earth that was becoming liquid, becoming fluid, becoming a medium I could drown in. Each marker gave me a few seconds, a brief respite from the forward pull before surrendering to the structure's gravity and forcing me to lurch toward the next post in the countdown. Mile marker 105, 195, each one a temporary anchor, each one a moment to catch my breath before the next desperate sprint towards salvation. That was really just another step toward doom. And all the while, the structure breathed, the walls pulsed, the imprisoned travelers watched my progress with eyes that held no hope. Only resignation, only acceptance of the fate that had claimed them and would soon claim me. At mile marker 90, I felt something change. The pulling force lessened slightly, as if the structure had eased off, had decided to let me come to it willingly rather than dragging me by force. The wind died down to a whisper, the breathing sound softened to something almost gentle, and I stood there clinging to the marker post, gasping, crying, knowing I couldn't keep doing this for another 90 markers, knowing I wool. Slip or fall or simply lose the strength to continue long before I reached zero. But then I saw something that gave me a thread of hope so thin I almost didn't dare grasp it. Back where my car should have been, back in the direction I'd come from, a light appeared. Not one of the blue flowing lights that had investigated me, but warm yellow light, the kind that comes from headlights, from another car, from another traveler on this impossible road. Someone else was here, someone else was counting down their backward miles, and if they were behind me, if they hadn't reached the structure yet, then maybe, just maybe, I could reach them, could warn them, could find some way to break this cycle before we both ended up pressed into those breathing walls. I let go of mile marker 90 and ran. Not toward the structure and zero, but back back toward the light, back up the countdown, fighting against what felt like running uphill through mud, through water, through resistance that grew stronger with each step, but that I forced myself through anyway, because that light represented hope, represented possibility, represented the chance that not all countdowns had to reach their end. Mile marker 95 emerged from the darkness, then 100, 105, and I was counting up now, going backward through the backward miles, reversing the journey that had seemed so irreversible. The structure behind me was screaming, or at least that's what the sound resembled, a high-pitched wailing that came from those imprisoned travelers, from the walls themselves, from whatever intelligence inhabited this place and was furious at my attempt to escape its gravity. The light ahead grew brighter, resolved into actual headlights, into an actual car, and I ran faster, pushing my exhausted legs beyond their limits, driven by adrenaline and desperation, and the absolute certainty that reaching that car was my only chaw. At mile marker 120, I could see the driver, a woman with her hands on the wheel, her face pale with fear, her eyes wide as she watched the markers count down, just as I had watched them count down what felt like hours or years or lifetimes ago. I reached her car at mile marker 125, slammed my hands against her window, screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to do anything except keep driving forward. She looked at me like I was a ghost, like I was one of the watchers, like I was something impossible, but she hit her brakes and her car screeched to a halt, and I yanked open her passenger door and threw myself inside, gasping and sobbing and incoherent. "Drive," I screamed at her. "Drive backward. Go back the way you came." She just stared at me, frozen, not comprehending, and I grabbed her shoulder, shook her, made her look at my face, made her see the terror there that was so genuine it couldn't be faked or misunderstood. "The markers are counting down," I told her. "They're counting down to 0, and if you reach 0, you can never leave. Drive backward now." Something in my voice, my face, my desperate panic must have convinced her, because she shifted into reverse and hit the gas, and her car lurched backward, tires squealing, engine roaring. Mile marker 130 appeared in her rear window, then 135, 140, and the further we went, the brighter her headlights became, the warmer the air got, the more normal reality felt around us. At mile marker 175, her car's electrical systems came back online. At mile marker 200, we saw the first stars through the windshield. At mile marker 225, the road was asphalt again, solid and modern, with proper lane markings and shoulder and all the familiar features of an actual highway. At mile marker 248, the markers started counting forward. We passed 249, then 250, 251, and the woman pulled over, put her car in park, and we both sat there shaking and crying and trying to process what had just happened. She asked me who I was, where I'd come from, how I'd gotten onto the road, and I told her everything, the whole impossible story from beginning to end. She believed me. How could she not? She'd been counting down herself, had been on her way to the same fate I'd barely escaped. Her name was Rebecca, and she'd been driving from Denver to Phoenix when her markers started going backward. She was a nurse, pragmatic and rational, not someone who believed in ghosts or monsters or impossible roads, but she believed now. We both believed because we'd seen it, experienced it, survived it by the thinnest of margins. We drove back to Phoenix together, taking turns at the wheel, keeping each other awake, refusing to let either of us be alone with our thoughts and memories and the lingering terror that follows you after you've seen behind reality's curtain. We reported it to the police, who thought we were drunk or high or suffering from some shared delusion. We found the Backward Mile Club online and told our stories there, where people believed us because they'd experienced their own versions of the same nightmare. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't driven at night since. Rebecca sold her car and moved to a city where she can walk or take public transportation everywhere. We talk every few days, checking in, making sure the other is okay, comparing notes on the nightmares we both still have where we're back on that road, counting down, unable to stop or turn around. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the question I can't answer: where's my car? When Rebecca and I drove back past the area where I'd abandoned it, where the engine had died at mile marker 175, there was nothing there. No car, no tire tracks, no evidence I'd ever stopped. It was like the road had swallowed it, had pulled it down in to whatever dimension or reality that structure existed in. And if my car is gone, what does that mean? Did I actually escape, or did I just trade one nightmare for another, one prison for a different kind of prison? Sometimes I'll be going about my day, doing ordinary things, living a normal life, and I'll feel it. That pulling sensation, like something is trying to drag me backward, trying to return me to the countdown I interrupted. I'll check my surroundings frantically, making sure I'm still in the real world, making sure the mile markers on nearby highways are counting forward like they should. But someday, I worry, I'll look up and see them counting down again. Someday the road will remember me, will claim what it thinks belongs to it, and I'll find myself back in that backward journey with no Rebecca to save me, no car to escape in, nothing except the countdown and the structure and the inevitability of reaching zero. So I'm telling you this story as a warning. If you're ever driving at night and you notice the mile markers counting down, turn around immediately. Don't be curious, don't investigate, don't assume it's a mistake or a hallucination or something that will resolve itself if you just keep driving. Turn around, take a different route, stop at a hotel, do anything except continue on that backward road, because some countdowns aren't meant to be completed, some numbers aren't meant to reach zero, and some destinations are places you can never return from. Every mile marker should count forward. That's the rule. That's how reality works. That's the basic agreement between the world and the travelers moving through it. When that rule breaks, when the markers count backward, you're not in the normal world anymore. You're somewhere else, somewhere that has its own rules, its own logic, its own hunger for travelers, foolish enough to follow the countdown all the way to its end. I was one of the lucky ones. I escaped with nothing worse than nightmares and paranoia and a terror of driving at night. But I see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes. All those travelers pressed into the walls of that breathing structure, trapped at mile marker zero, existing in some state between life and death, awareness and oblivion. How long have they been there? How long will they remain? And most terrifying of all, how many more travelers will join them before someone figures out how to stop the backward counting, how to close whatever gates or portals or wounds in reality allow that place to exist? I don't have answers. I only have questions and warnings and the absolute certainty that the road is not what we think it is. It's not just asphalt and paint and mile markers. It's something alive, something aware, something that watches and waits and sometimes reaches out to claim those who travel through its territory in the dead hours of the night, the weeks following my escape have been a descent into obsessive research and mounting paranoia that I can't shake no matter how hard I try. Sleep comes rarely now, and when it does, it's fractured and filled with dreams of counting down, of that structure breathing in the darkness, of walls made of flesh and stone that pulse with a rhythm that matches my own heartbeat. I wake up gasping, sometimes screaming, convinced that I'm back in that place, that my escape was the dream and the nightmare was the reality I never truly left. Rebecca calls these episodes road echoes, a term she came up with during one of our long late-night conversations where we try to make sense of what happened to us. She experiences them too, these moments where reality seems to thin and the backward road bleeds through into our normal world. She'll be at work, taking someone's blood pressure or administering Medica, and suddenly she'll feel that pulling sensation, that gravity that wants to drag her back toward mile marker zero. It lasts only seconds, but those seconds stretch out like hours, like the same temporal distortion we experienced on the actual road. And when it passes, she's left shaking and disoriented, having to excuse herself to the bathroom where she can cry in private and remind herself that she's still here, still in the real world, still safe. But are we safe? That's the question that haunts me every single day, that turns every moment of normalcy into something provisional and temporary, like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the road to finish what it started. I've started documenting everything, keeping detailed journals of every strange occurrence, every moment where I feel that pull, every time I see something that reminds me of that night. The journal is now 300 pages long, filled with observations and theories and desperate attempts to understand what we experienced and what it might mean for our future. I've also been investigating the Backward Mile Club more thoroughly, reading through years of archived posts, tracking down members who've gone silent, trying to piece together a comprehensive picture of this phenomenon. What I've found is both illuminating and deeply disturbing. The club has over 2,000 members now, people from all over the world who've experienced backward mile markers on their highways, their roads, their routes through the darkness, but the membership doesn't tell the whole story. For every person who reports their experience and joins the community, there are dozens who experience it and never speak up, who convince themselves it was a hallucination or a dream or something they misunderstood. And then there are the ones who never get the chance to report anything at all. I've been tracking missing persons cases, cross-referencing them with the locations where backward mile incidents have been reported, and the correlation is impossible to ignore. In the past 5 years alone, over 300 people have vanished while traveling through areas where the backward miles occur. Not all of them disappeared. On nights they might have encountered the phenomenon, and certainly some of those disappearances have rational explanations like accidents or crimes or voluntary departures, but the number is too high to be coincidental, too concentrated in specific geographic areas to be random chance. I created a map plotting every reported backward mile incident against every unexplained disappearance on highways in North America. The overlay is chilling. There are hotspots, regions where both phenomena occur with disturbing frequency. The stretch of I-80, where Marcus Chen had his experience, shows 17 disappearances in the past 3 years. Highway 191 in Montana, where Sarah Martinez counted down past zero into negative numbers, has claimed 11 people. The section of I-70, where Jennifer Wu drove through the markerless void between 0 and 274, has seen 23 vanishings, including an entire family who were last seen at a gas station just 10 miles from where the backward counting typically begins. These aren't just statistics to me anymore. Each pin on my map represents a person, a life, a story that ended somewhere on a dark highway under circumstances their loved ones will never understand. I've reached out to some of the families, carefully, gently asking questions about their missing relatives' final journeys. Most don't want to talk, which I understand completely. The pain is too fresh, too raw, and I'm just some stranger asking weird questions about mile markers and impossible roads. But a few have been willing to share what they know and what they've told me has only deepened the mystery. One woman's husband disappeared on I-40 in New Mexico, the same highway where my own backward journey occurred, though several hundred miles west of where my markers started counting down. He'd called her around midnight, said he was making good time, would be home by dawn. That was the last anyone heard from him. When they found his truck 3 days later, it was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 89, engine running, headlights on, driver's door open. His phone was on the passenger seat, still turned on, still showing that his last call had been to his wife. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of where he'd gone or why he'd stopped. The truck's GPS showed that he'd been traveling east, making normal progress, right up until the moment he stopped. But according to the Highway Patrol report, there were witnesses who'd driven past that spot earlier in the night who swore there'd been no truck on the shoulder, which meant he'd stopped and disappeared in a window of less than 40 minutes. Another family lost their daughter, a college student driving home for Christmas break, on a stretch of highway in Wyoming. Her last text message to her roommate was sent at 2:17 a.m., a simple, still driving, boring as hell, see you in a few weeks. By 3 a.m. she'd vanished. Her car was found a week later, discovered by a rancher 50 miles from the highway, sitting in the middle of his property with no tracks leading to it, no explanation for how it had gotten there. The car was locked, the keys inside, the gas tank still half full, but the interior was covered in frost, thick ice coating every surface, despite the fact that it was found in late December in an area where the temperature hadn't dropped below freezing in days, and carved into the frost on the inside of the windshield, as if someone had traced it with their finger. From the driver's seat was a single number, 0. These stories repeat with variations across my database, across my map, across the testimonials I've collected from grieving relatives who don't understand what happened to their loved ones and probably never will. Cars found abandoned with engines running and doors open. Vehicles discovered miles from any road with no tracks or trails showing how they got there. Interiors covered in impossible frost or filled with that acrid smell like ozone and burning metal. And always, somewhere in the vehicle or near it, evidence of the countdown, a number scratched into the dashboard, a mile marker sign found in the back seat that shouldn't have been removable, coordinates scrawled on a piece of paper that don't correspond to any location on any map. The more I research, the more convinced I become that what Rebecca and I experienced wasn't an isolated incident, wasn't some random cosmic hiccup that happened to catch us in its wake. It's systematic, it's organized, it's purposeful. The backward miles are hunting for something, selecting for something, and those who fit whatever criteria it's searching for end up at mile marker 0, end up pressed into those breathing walls, end up becoming part of something vast and ancient, fundamentally hostile to human existence. But what is it? That's the question that keeps me up at night, even more than the nightmares, even more than the fear of being pulled back. What is the structure? What is the intelligence behind the backward counting? And most pressingly, what does it want with all those travelers it captures? I've developed several theories, each more disturbing than the last, each feeling simultaneously too impossible to be true and too consistent with the evidence to be dismissed. Theory 1. The structure is some kind of entity from outside our reality, something that exists in DI, dimensions we can't perceive, and the backward miles are how it reaches into our world to feed or reproduce or accomplish whatever biological or metaphysical imperatives drive it. The trapped travelers aren't dead, they're being processed, broken down into some form of energy or consciousness that the structure can use for its own purposes. This would explain why the bodies in the walls still seem aware, still seem to be experiencing something even though they're physically imprisoned. Their fuel, raw material, resources being consumed slowly over years or decades or centuries. Theory 2, the structure is a prison and the backward miles are a sorting mechanism, a test that identifies certain types of people for imprisonment. Maybe it's looking for specific psychological traits, specific patterns of thought or behavior that mark someone as dangerous to whatever created the prison. The countdown could be a judgment process, evaluating travelers as they drive, measuring them against criteria we don't understand, and those who fail the test end up locked away at mile marker 0, where they can't harm whatever it is they were deemed a threat to. This theory would explain the selectivity of the phenomenon, why some people drive through the backward miles and emerge unscathed, while others like me feel that irresistible pull toward the structure. Theory 3, the backward miles are a wound in reality, a scar left by something that happened long ago, and the structure is simultaneously a monument to that event and an attempt to heal the damage it caused. The trapped travelers aren't victims, they're volunteers, people whose consciousness has been repurposed to serve as living stitches holding reality together at a point where it was torn or damaged beyond normal repair. This theory is the most disturbing because it suggests that what happened to all those people might be necessary, might be preventing something even worse from occurring, which raises terrible ethical questions about whether anyone should try to stop it. Theory 4, we're not the first humans to encounter this phenomenon. The structure and the backward miles have been here far longer than our highways, manifesting on wagon trails and dirt roads and game paths stretching back to prehistoric times. Every culture has stories about roads that lead nowhere, paths that fold back on themselves, journeys into darkness from which travelers never return. What if all those myths and legends were describing the same thing we experienced, just filtered through different cultural contexts? The Greek myth of Orpheus, descending into the underworld and being told not to look back. The Celtic legends of fairy roads that steal travelers at crossroads. The Native American stories about spirit paths that appear only at certain times. Maybe they were all describing the backward miles passed down through generations as warnings that eventually got diluted into folklore and lost their vital truth. I've presented these theories to the Backward Mile Club, hoping to start a serious discussion about what we're dealing with and how we might study or combat it. The response has been mixed. Some members appreciate the attempt to systematize our understanding, to approach the phenomenon with scientific rigor, rather than just sharing scared stories in the dark. Others think I'm overthinking it, that trying to understand the backward miles is like an ant trying to understand calculus, that we're dealing with something so far beyond human comprehension that theories are pointless. And a troubling minority have started to view the structure with something approaching reverence, talking about it as if it's divine, as if being selected for the countdown is an honor rather than a death sentence. This last T group worries me the most. They formed a sub-faction within the club, calling themselves the Zero Seekers, and they actively try to trigger backward mile experiences. They drive the hotspot highways at the most active times, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., following routes and rituals they believe will increase their chances of encountering the phenomenon. Some claim to have experienced multiple countdowns, to have driven to progressively lower numbers before turning back, as if they're training themselves, preparing for the moment when they'll have the courage to go all the way to 0. I've tried arguing with them, explaining that they don't understand what they're courting, that the structure isn't some mystical enlightenment waiting at the end of a countdown, but a nightmare that will trap them forever. I've shared my first-hand account of what I saw, the horror of those imprisoned travelers, the wrongness of that breathing building in the darkness. But the Zero Seekers don't listen. They accuse me of cowardice, of turning back from a threshold I should have crossed, of missing an opportunity that most people never get. One of them even suggested that my escape wasn't an escape at all, but a failure, that I was rejected by the structure and sent back because I wasn't worthy of whatever transformation occurs at mile marker 0. That comment haunted me for days because part of me wonders if they're right. What if I didn't escape? What if I was released? The structure had me, had pulled me down to mile marker 90, had opened itself to receive me. Why did the pull suddenly lessen? Why was I able to run back toward Rebecca's car when moments before I'd been unable to do anything except lurch forward from marker to marker? Was it random chance? Or was I specifically allowed to leave, sent back for some purpose I don't yet understand? This doubt has led me down another rabbit hole. This one focused on other people who claim to have escaped the backward miles. I found 23 documented cases of people who counted down significantly past mile marker 100 and then managed to reverse course and return to the normal world. I've interviewed 12 of them personally, long conversations where we compare experiences and try to identify commonalities. And I found something disturbing. None of us have been able to fully reintegrate into normal life. There's Marcus Chen, who quit trucking after his experience and now works from home as a dispatch coordinator, rarely leaving his house, certainly never driving at night. There's Jennifer Wu, the mathematician who drove through zero, who lost her job at the university because she kept having panic attacks during lectures, who now lives with her parents and rarely goes outside. There's a man named Robert Delacroix who experienced backward miles in Louisiana, who made it all the way to mile marker 15 before turning around, who now drinks himself unconscious every night because it's the only way he can sleep without dreaming of the countdown. There's a woman named Yuki Tanaka who encountered the phenomenon in Japan, proof that this isn't just an American occurrence, who survived her countdown only to become obsessed with photographing highways at night, filling entire hard drives with images of mile markers and road signs, searching each photo obsessively for signs that the backward counting is starting again. We're all damaged, we're all changed, and we're all experiencing the road echoes, those moments where reality thins and we feel the pull of the structure trying to drag us back. The frequency varies from person to person. Marcus feels it once or twice a month. I feel it several times a week. Robert experiences it daily, multiple times, so often that he's almost learned to fun. Xixian through it, but Yuki has it worst of all. She says the pull is constant now, a background hum of wrongness that never fully fades, that colors every moment of her existence with the certainty that she's living on borrowed time, that eventually the road will finish reclaiming her. I asked each of them the same question: do you think we actually escaped, or were we released for a purpose? The answers were depressingly consistent. 10 out of 12 believe we were released. They can't articulate why they believe this or what purpose we might serve, but they all share the intuition that our escapes were too convenient, too perfectly timed, too much like we were being placed back into the world rather than breaking free from imprisonment. One of them, a former military analyst named James Torres, put it most directly: we're seeds. It sent us back to spread something, to prepare something, to serve as anchors or beacons or markers for whatever it's planning to do next. We think we escaped, but really we're Trojans, carrying the enemy back into the city walls. That image keeps me up at night. The idea that I'm not a survivor but a vector, that my very presence in the normal world might be facilitating something terrible, preparing the ground for an expansion or invasion or transformation that will make the isolated backward mile incidents look insignificant by comparison. I've started monitoring myself obsessively, tracking every thought and action, looking for signs that I'm being controlled or influenced or used as a puppet for something else's agenda. So far, I haven't found anything definitive, but how would I even know? If something was using me as a tool, would it be obvious or would it be subtle, influencing my choices in ways so small and natural that I'd never notice the manipulation? Rebecca thinks I'm spiraling, that the paranoia is becoming unhealthy. I need to step back from the research and focus on healing rather than understanding. She might be right. My life has become nothing but the backward miles, nothing but research and investigation and obsessive documentation of every detail I can extract from the experience. I've lost my job because I couldn't focus on work, couldn't show up on time, couldn't be reliable when my mind was always half trapped on that nightmare road. My friends have stopped calling because I only want to talk about one thing, because I can't engage with normal conversation anymore, because being around me means being dragged into my obsession, whether they want to be or not. But I can't stop. Every day I don't spend researching feels like a day wasted, like time I should have been using to prepare for whatever's coming, because something is coming. I can feel it in the increasing frequency of the road echoes, in the growing number of reports flooding into the Backward Mile Club, in the way the phenomenon seems to be accelerating, intensifying, becoming more aggressive in its selection and capture of travelers. The incidents are happening closer together now. What used to be dozens of reports per year has become dozens per month, then dozens per week. The hotspots on my map are spreading, new locations lighting up with backward mile activity, the phenomenon expanding its territory like a growing stain, and the experiences people report are changing, becoming more intense, more overtly threatening. Where early reports described eerie but relatively passive countdowns, recent reports describe active hunting behavior, the road itself seeming to pursue travelers, to chase them, to trap them more deliberately. One man reported that when he tried to turn around after his markers started counting backward, his car steering wheel locked up, refusing to turn, forcing him to continue straight ahead into the countdown. A woman said that exits disappeared as she approached them, the off-ramp she'd planned to use simply not existing when she reached their location, as if the highway was actively preventing her from leaving. Another driver described seeing the structure appear directly ahead of him while he was still, at mile marker 150, as if space had collapsed and brought the terminus of the countdown forward to meet him rather than waiting for him to reach it naturally.